Philosophy. For many, that word might bring to mind, really abstract ideas or maybe dusty old books.
Hmm.
But the truth is, philosophy is actually deeply woven into the fabric of how we live, how we make sense of the world, even how we understand ourselves.
Absolutely. And sometimes the very ground beneath philosophy's feet, it sort of shifts
Yeah,
dramatically,
yeah.
so much so that it has to fundamentally rebuild its core ideas. It's like the underlying operating system for how we think collectively gets this massive update.
Right.
Concepts that seem totally solid, like what even counts as knowledge or
Yeah.
what is reality, they suddenly don't quite work anymore.
Because of new discoveries or
Yeah,
just huge changes in how society functions.
exactly. All of the above.
And that's precisely what we're diving into today. We've got a stack of sources here exploring just that kind of revolution, a huge reconstruction in philosophy, moving from ancient ways of thinking to the ideas that really shape our modern world.
Yeah, these sources, they come from a series of lectures that trace this, well, this intellectual earthquake, you could call it.
An earthquake, I like that.
They look at how these radical shifts in science, big changes in society, and a whole new understanding of human life just forced philosophy to rethink basically everything.
Everything. Like what specifically?
Experience, reason, reality, our ideals, logic, morals, even our place in society. The whole kit and caboodle.
Wow. Okay. So our mission then in this deep dive is to try and unpack this massive shift.
Mm-hmm.
We want to get a clearer picture of the core differences between that, let's call it the classic way of seeing the world, and the modern one that eventually replaced it.
Right.
And I think most importantly, we'll see why this isn't just ancient history, right? Understanding this reconstruction helps you understand how we think about knowledge, progress, and society right now, today.
It really does. It sets the stage for so much.
Okay, let's unpack this then.
Hmm.
To really grasp the reconstruction, we probably need to step back first and understand what was being rebuilt.
Good idea.
How did philosophy even get started, according to these sources? And what was that original blueprint it was working from? It wasn't just pure logic from day one, was it?
No, not at all. These sources suggest it grew out of something much more, well, human.
Okay.
Imagination, memory, tradition. Think about remembering something from the past. Often, it's not about the objective facts, is it?
No, it's the drama, the feeling.
Exactly. The drama, the emotion, the fears, the hopes tied up in it. Like seeing a cloud and saying it looks like a camel. That's imagination,
Okay.
connecting what's there to something familiar, maybe emotionally loaded.
So early on, it was much more about the story and the feeling than just the cold hard facts.
That's the picture they paint. And over time, these imaginative, kind of emotionally charged impressions from individuals, they got solidified
How so?
into group memory, into tradition. They weren't objective facts, sure, but they became really powerful social norms, sometimes even cults, because they were built on these shared, generalized emotional records.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
But then, alongside this sort of imaginative tradition, people were also doing things that needed a different kind of knowing.
Right. That's the key tension. As practical, hands-on knowledge grew, from arts, crafts, early industries.
Things that required actually watching how stuff works.
Precisely. Things that required careful observation of how materials actually behave to get results. That kind of knowledge started to, well, bump up against these traditional, more emotional beliefs.
And that clash, they can actually get pretty serious. The sources point to Socrates, don't they?
They do. As a really powerful example, he started questioning those traditional assumptions using a more, practical, matter-of-fact method of inquiry.
And people didn't like that.
Society felt threatened enough to execute him. It shows how deep that conflict ran.
Wow. So what's fascinating then is how the classic philosophers, people like Plato and Aristotle, how did they respond to this tension?
Well, they saw the conflict, right, between this emerging practical knowledge and the traditional moral and social values people held dear.
Yep.
Their goal, essentially, was to use rational investigation philosophy to put those old values onto a basis that couldn't really be questioned anymore.
Like give them a permanent foundation.
Yes, a metaphysical basis. Metaphysics, this study of ultimate reality, became a way to kind of intellectually justify custom and tradition.
Okay. So instead of just saying, this is how we've always done it, they tried to argue this is how it must be done because it's baked into the very structure of the universe.
Exactly, you nailed it. And this led to a really core idea that just dominated Western thought for centuries.
Yeah.
A fundamental split in reality itself.
A split. How so?
There was this higher, perfect, unchanging, ideal, or rational realm, sometimes called the noumenal or the truly real reality.
Okay, the perfect world.
And then there was our everyday world, the inferior, constantly changing material world of empirical experience, the phenomenal world.
Like a perfect blueprint up in the sky versus the messy construction site down here on Earth.
That's a great analogy. And these sources argue this wasn't just abstract philosophizing. This two-tiered universe, it kind of reflected the social structures of the time.
How do you mean?
Hierarchical structures. Almost feudal, you could say. A world with fixed classes and kinds of things, some inherently superior to others, mirroring social castes.
Wow.
It was almost like projecting this rigid family principle onto the whole cosmos, where everything had its fixed place, its rank.
So the universe itself had this strict hierarchy built in.
Yes. And ancient science, fit right into this picture. The universe was seen as closed, finite,
Fixed.
with fixed forms, inherent qualities determining how things behaved. Earthly things naturally go down, fire naturally goes up. That's just their nature.
No real novelty.
Change was often seen as just, flux or maybe repetition within those fixed boundaries. An acorn becoming an oak. That was just the acorn fulfilling its predetermined form. It wasn't seen as something genuinely new emerging.
Change was more about predictable cycles, not real transformation.
Right. And knowledge, therefore, in this kind of context, was seen primarily as contemplation.
Just looking.
Just looking at or beholding these fixed eternal forms to find certainty. It was often viewed as completely separate from practical application.
Which was seen as lower.
Exactly. Practical stuff was associated with that lower, changing world, the work of artisans. And artisans' knowledge, useful for building a chair, sure, but it wasn't considered true or high knowledge like understanding the eternal forms was.
Okay. So the old way was fundamentally about finding the fixed, the permanent, the ideal truth, and knowledge was basically just passively seeing it. It sounds incredibly static.
It was very focused on permanence, but then the world itself just stopped feeling so fixed.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, this stable hierarchical view, which was philosophically grounded in metaphysics and that traditional science, it really began to fracture. It buckled under the weight of massive changes happening in the world.
Our sources really spotlight the 16th and 17th centuries, don't they? As the time when these forces just gained unstoppable momentum. What were these big shakers?
Well, you had huge industrial and economic shifts, for starters. Exploration was opening up new worlds.
Right, trade routes, new goods.
Global trade booming, new wealth pouring in, especially from the Americas. This fostered a totally different spirit, a spirit of adventure. It loosened people's ties to their local traditions, pulled minds away from purely abstract concerns toward the concrete world and, its possibilities.
New experiences literally changing people's worldview.
Absolutely. And politically, you saw a huge shift. People started moving away from seeing states as, divinely ordained or necessary structures.
Towards seeing them as human inventions.
Yeah, exactly. Human creations formed by people for their own purposes. Think about contract theories. This reflected a growing sense of individualism.
How?
People weren't just born into a fixed place in a hierarchy anymore. They started seeing themselves as individuals with inherent rights. They began thinking of themselves first, not just as, say, part of a guild or a feudal class.
Recognizing individual rights must have really chipped away at that idea of fixed social ranks.
It did, profoundly. And then there was religion. The Protestant Reformation played a massive part.
How did that fit in?
Well, it challenged the power of universal institutions like the Catholic Church and put this new, powerful emphasis on individual conscience.
The individual's direct relationship with God.
Right. The idea that every single soul had intrinsic worth, regardless of their social status, that was a powerful force pushing towards democracy and what you might call moral individualism. It really shook the foundations of systems that relied on subordinating the person to the institution.
So you've got economic, political, and religious forces all pushing towards change, individualism, and a focus on this world, the here and now. This isn't just history class stuff. It's creating a whole new attitude, a new way of feeling about the world.
Absolutely. It created a new temperament, a new spirit. The focus shifted dramatically away from the eternal and universal toward what is changing, specific, concrete. And this new spirit, it fueled the explosion of natural science, physics, chemistry, biology. which, by the way, also happened to provide the necessary tools for even more economic transformation down the line.
A feedback loop.
Sort of, yeah.
No.
And there's one philosopher who really captured this new spirit, especially regarding knowledge.
Who's that?
Francis Bacon.
Ah, knowledge is power.
That's the one. That phrase perfectly embodies this shift. He looked at the learning of his day, the sort of university stuff, and he basically dismissed a lot of it as otiose, not operative. Meaning useless, not doing anything productive in the world. He saw it as delicate, just for show, maybe fantastic, like alchemy, maybe going nowhere, and contentious, just about winning arguments.
Okay.
He wanted knowledge that could act on the world, change things.
He wanted knowledge that worked.
Exactly. And that, he argued, required a whole new method of thinking. Not just a logic for teaching or demonstrating what was already believed to be true, but a logic of discovery. He used that great analogy, didn't he? The spider spins theories just from itself. The ant just collects facts, piles them up.
The bee.
But the bee gathers nectar from nature and transforms it into honey. True knowledge, like the bee, takes from the world and actively makes something new and useful with it.
So knowledge isn't just accumulation, it's transformation. A creative act.
Yes.
Yes.
And for Bacon, the proof of real knowledge was its progress. Did it lead somewhere new? The old logic focused on proving existing truths. He felt it just reinforced the status quo, kept things inert.
Right.
The new logic looks to the future. It's constantly testing received truths against new experiences. It sees old truths not as the final answer, but as tools, as starting points to find new truths. That's why he's often called the father of induction.
Starting with specifics, observations, and building up.
Right, building up general rules, but always ready to refine them based on more experience. Always looking for the unknown, not just repeating the known.
And he had a critique of how people were thinking, too.
Yeah, he thought traditional thinking often built what he called anticipations of nature.
Meaning?
Imposing our own preconceived human ideas, our neat logical structures, onto the world instead of patiently, carefully observing and discovering how nature actually operates on its own terms.
Letting nature speak first.
In a way, yes. His big work, the Novum Organum, was deliberately presented as a new tool for discovery. It was a direct challenge to Aristotle's organon, which Bacon saw as just a tool for arguing based on what you already assumed to be true.
And this new science, this wasn't just a solo genius effort anymore.
No, Bacon was very clear on this. He recognized that error wasn't just an individual failing. It was often a social product, embedded in traditions and institutions.
So the solution had to be social, too.
Therefore, truth must be discovered through social agencies, through organized, collaborative effort, not just by lone thinkers contemplating in isolation. Science needed to be a team sport, in a sense.
Okay, so knowledge shifts dramatically.
Right.
From passive contemplation of the fixed and eternal
Right.
to active doing, discovering, gaining power over nature, often through teamwork and looking towards future progress.
That's the essence of the shift.
This sounds like it would completely revolutionize the very idea of what experience and reason are at their core.
It absolutely did. It changed everything. You know, in that old view, the one championed by Plato and Aristotle, experience was seen as pretty limited.
How so?
It was sort of trial and error, maybe just a bunch of disconnected instances leading to habits or customs, but not genuine knowledge, not the real stuff.
That was reserved for reason.
Exactly. True, certain knowledge was seen as something found outside of messy everyday experience, up in the realm of pure reason. Even later thinkers who really emphasized experience, like the empiricists, Locke, Hume, they sometimes ended up seeing experience as just this chaotic jumble of isolated sensations. Hume famously struggled with how we could get reliable knowledge from just sense data.
So experience was the unreliable, kind of low-level stuff, and reason was this higher orderly faculty that somehow made sense of it all from above, like a manager looking down.
That's a pretty good picture of the traditional view. But these sources argue that thanks to all those changes we talked about, scientific, social, and also new insights coming from biology and psychology, a completely different understanding of experience became possible and necessary, really.
Okay, how does this new view see experience then?
Fundamentally, it's understood as doing and undergoing.
Doing and undergoing. Explain that.
It's the constant interaction between an organism like you and your environment. You act, you do something.
And then?
And then you experience the consequences of that action. You undergo the results. It's not about passively sitting there waiting for impressions to hit you like little data packets.
Oh, it's active. It's back and forth.
Exactly. It's interactive, not just receptive. Think about that classic example. An infant puts a finger in a flame,
Ouch.
right? The doing might be a random reach exploring. The undergoing is the heat, the pain. The crucial thing is the connection made between the doing and the undergoing.
Ah, the connection is the experience.
That's what creates experience in a vital sense. A lesson is learned, right? Or think about this. You're writing, and your pencil point breaks.
Right.
When it was working smoothly, you probably weren't even consciously feeling the pressure of the point on the paper.
True.
The sensation, that sudden shock of it breaking, isn't just an isolated feeling hitting you. It's an interruption of your ongoing activity.
Right, it stops you.
It's a signal telling you to pause, reassess, redirect your action. It's a stimulus to think, okay, what's wrong here? What do I need to do next? Sharpen it, get a new pencil.
Okay, so sensations aren't just bits of data arriving. They're signals for adjustment within an activity.
Precisely. They are points where readjustment is required within an ongoing flow of activity. And this changes everything, because if the connection is built into the activity itself,
Then you don't need...
you don't necessarily need a separate, super empirical reason to come swooping in from outside to connect all the dots. The organization and connection are inherent in the process of living and acting purposefully.
And biology and psychology back this up, this dynamic view.
Yes. Biology shows us that life itself is a process of constantly reconstructing and interacting with the environment. Higher life forms, especially, don't just passively adapt, they actively reshape their surroundings.
Okay.
And psychology, particularly psychology informed by biology, start to see intelligence differently, too. Not as this separate mind looking down from on high, as an organizing factor within experience itself. It's a tool we use, developed through evolution, for purposefully dealing with the obstacles we encounter while we're trying to do something.
So intelligence is part of the action, part of the living process, not separate from it.
Exactly. And here's the real crux, the key takeaway from this new conception. It means experiential knowledge becomes experimental.
Experimental.
How so? We don't just repeat the past out of blind habit. We use the results of our past actions, the consequences we underwent, to suggest new aims and new methods for creating new and hopefully better experiences in the future.
So experience learns from itself.
It becomes a process that can regulate and improve itself constructively. We learn from doing in order to do better next time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So reason and science. They aren't these finished truths delivered from some higher realm, separate from the messiness of life.
What are they then?
They are ideas, plans, methods that are suggested by our experiences and then tested in our experiences. Their value lies in how they are used to expand and enrich experience, often through practical inventions and solutions.
So the principles and concepts we call reason.
They're really hypotheses, programs of action. And their truth, their validity, is tested by what happens when we put them into practice. They aren't finished dogmas handed down.
Okay, wow. So the big shift here is seeing experience as dynamic, interactive, capable of self-improvement, and reason as the active method we use within that whole process to guide our actions and solve problems.
That's it.
This completely overturns that old static picture. And it must have huge implications, especially for how we think about what's real and what's ideal.
Huge implications. You remember that old split we talked about?
The perfect, unchanging ideal or real realm way up high versus the messy, changing empirical world down here.
Exactly. That was so central to classic philosophy.
And our sources connect that split partly to just basic human nature, right?
Yeah, partly to a very understandable, very human tendency to want to escape the difficulties, the unpleasantness, the disagreeable parts of life.
We wish things were better, more perfect.
We idealize things. And in that older view, change and uncertainty, even time itself, were often seen as signs of imperfection, maybe even a lack of full being or reality.
So true reality, if it was perfect, had to be changeless.
Utterly changeless, eternally at rest, like that quote mentioned in the sources. Nothing that is perfectly real moves.
Right.
And if ultimate reality was this fixed, static perfection, then naturally the highest form of knowledge was just contemplating it, passively beholding it. That was seen as superior to the practical knowledge needed to deal with the messy, changing world.
But modern science, as we were just saying, seems to have the completely opposite attitude towards change.
Totally the opposite. Instead of fearing change or seeing it as a sign of imperfection, modern science embraces it. It dives right in. It actively tries to break down apparent fixities. It assumes change is happening all the time, even in things that look perfectly still. And crucially, crucially, it experiments by inducing change, by intervening.
It pokes the world to see what happens.
Pretty much. It dives into the process of change itself. And reality, in this modern scientific view, isn't something finished and perfect just to be admired from afar.
What is it then?
It's seen as material for change. It's seen as obstacles to be overcome, and also as means, as resources to achieve desired changes.
Like a sculptor seeing marble not just as beautiful, but as material to be shaped.
Exactly like that.
Mhm.
Modern science tends to see the world as something to be actively worked upon, transformed.
So knowledge isn't passive viewing anymore. It's about active transformation.
Precisely. Knowledge, especially in the experimental sciences, is practical, it's operative. Its real test is its ability to help us bring about specific, intended changes or achieve certain results.
Okay, that makes sense for science. But what happens to our ideals in this new view? The perfect realms, the things we aspire to, maybe the refuges from reality.
That's a great question. In classic philosophy, ideals were often these separate, perfect worlds, maybe unreachable, but places of escape or objects of contemplation.
Right.
But when knowledge becomes active and practical, oriented towards change, ideals themselves change their role. They stop being these aloof destinations.
Yeah, become more.
They become imagined possibilities for the world we actually live in. They become tools, methods for transforming this reality.
So ideals become more like blueprints for making this world better, not just pictures of a different perfect world somewhere else.
Exactly. They function as instruments of action. They act like platforms from which we can examine our current reality, identify its problems, and figure out ways to change it for the better.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about the ideal of eliminating distance, of instant communication. In the old view, maybe that's just a dream of a perfect world where distance doesn't matter.
Okay.
But in the new view, that ideal isn't some separate place. It's an imagined possibility for this world. And that ideal prompts us to look for ways, using the tools and forces we actually have available, to communicate across distance.
Which leads to inventions.
Leads to the telegraph, the telephone, radio, the internet. The ideal instant communication becomes a method of inquiry, a driving force for experimentation and invention that helps us make that ideal a reality, or closer to reality, here and now.
The ideal guides our action to transform the concrete environment. Got it.
Yes, and this whole shift from contemplative knowledge to practical experimental knowing, it's just huge. It means that philosophy itself, if it's going to stay relevant and keep up with the spirit of modern life and science, needs to become more practical and experimental too.
So philosophy's job actually changes. It's not just about debating abstractions anymore.
That's the argument. Instead of getting lost in, endless debates about the ultimate nature of reality or knowledge problems, totally separated from lived experience,
Philosophy should focus on
it should focus intelligence on understanding and helping solve specific human and social problems. It should project ideals not as these unreachable heavens, but as active tools, as methods for analyzing concrete situations and guiding action to change them.
The sources mentioned the World War as an example of this disconnect.
Yeah, a tragic example where these very high abstract ideals were proclaimed, but the actual methods used, the means, were all about brute force and realistic power struggles. It showed a deep disconnect between the professed ideals and any intelligent method for actually achieving them.
A powerful illustration of ideals that weren't really operative, weren't guiding action effectively.
Exactly. This new view really calls on philosophy to give up claiming some kind of barren monopoly on knowing absolute reality.
And instead,
Instead, it should apply intelligence to enlighten and guide the moral forces that actually move people, to help us achieve, as the sources put it, a more ordered and intelligent happiness. It means trying to bring together that practical, effective attitude of science with the value of contemplative appreciation, learning how to use nature effectively while still being able to appreciate its wonder and beauty.
So the big takeaway here seems to be that ideals aren't just beautiful dreams floating out there. They are, or should be, powerful tools for intelligent action and change in this world.
Precisely. They become working hypotheses for making things better.
Okay, logic. Now, for many listeners, that probably sounds like the driest philosophical topic imaginable, just boring rules of thought.
It can seem that way.
But these sources argue there's actually deep confusion about logic that holds us back intellectually, and resolving it is essential if we want to apply intelligence effectively in the world.
There really is a lot of confusion. Traditional logic often gets caught in this bind. Is it stating the ultimate necessary laws of the universe? like metaphysical truths? Or is it just a set of trivial rules like A is A, formal stuff that doesn't seem to connect much to real thinking?
Right.
And this confusion becomes a serious practical problem if logic is supposed to actually guide how we think and solve problems. Contemporary logical theory, these sources suggest, is kind of the battleground where many fundamental philosophical differences really clash.
So what's the new way of looking at logic that tries to cut through this confusion?
Well, the emerging view sees logic as being both empirical and normative.
Okay, break that down. Empirical and normative.
It's empirical because it's based on studying how thinking actually happens in practice. It looks at how we succeed in solving problems and, critically, why we fail when we do. It observes thought in action.
Okay, so it studies how we actually think well.
And then, based on that study, it becomes normative. By analyzing success and failure, it identifies and organizes the most effective methods for thinking intelligently.
So it derives the rules from what works.
Exactly. Logic, in this view, becomes the art and science of developing and refining intelligent methods for reconstructing our experience, for solving problems effectively.
It studies how we actually think well to figure out the best ways to think.
That's a good way to put it. And this view starts from a really crucial point. Thinking doesn't just happen in a vacuum out of the blue.
Where does it start?
It begins when we face real problems, conflicts, or difficulties in our experience. Situations that are doubtful, uncertain, unsettled, or troubled.
Thinking is born out of trouble. That's memorable.
It is. And the key difference, the distinguishing feature between genuine thinking and just, say, staking into daydreams or merely wishing problems away,
Yes.
is facing the facts. It requires diligent inquiry, careful observation, really scrutinizing the situation you find yourself in.
You have to actually look hard at the problem, not just, hope it vanishes.
Right. And in this problem-solving process, our ideas, meanings, concepts, the very building blocks of thought, they aren't seen as fixed truths or perfect copies of some external reality.
What are they then?
They function as suggestions, as hypotheses. They're ideas about what the problem might be, or hypotheses about how you might respond effectively to resolve it. They are, as the sources nicely put it, platforms of response, tools for guiding action.
So ideas of proposed solutions, possible ways forward, not pictures of ultimate reality.
Exactly.
Okay, then how do we know if these ideas, these hypotheses or theories are true? The old way often looked for certainty, right? Maybe connecting ideas to some absolute dogma or a self-evident truth.
Right, the quest for certainty was huge. But the new view offers a pretty radical alternative answer.
Which is?
Truth lies in consequences.
And what happens when you use the idea?
Yes, ideas are hypotheses. They are accepted as true, or perhaps better, as valid or warranted, only as basis for actions that test them. They are tools, and their truth, their validity, is demonstrated by how well they work when put to use in resolving the specific situation that prompted the thinking in the first place.
Like a tool in a toolbox.
Exactly. And like any tool, they are always open to refinement, to improvement, based on further experience.
So it's not about whether the idea perfectly matches some pre-existing separate reality out there,
No.
but about whether it successfully resolves the problem, helps you navigate the situation, or achieve your intended goal within that situation.
That's the core idea. The sources use that wonderfully insightful phrase, truth is adverbial, not a thing.
Adverbial, like how you do something.
Exactly.
Right.
It's not a static quality an idea possesses intrinsically. It's about how the idea functions, its usefulness, its serviceability in making the needed reorganization and experience, in resolving the specific difficulty that initiated the inquiry.
Can you give an analogy?
Think about the truth of a roadmap. Its truth isn't some inherent quality it possesses just sitting there. Its truth lies in whether it functions as a map, whether it successfully guides you from point A to point B.
Its truth is in its performance, its consequences when used.
Precisely. Confirmation, verification, these happen in the works and the consequences of acting on the idea.
This experimental view of truth, it means you absolutely have to be willing to be wrong, doesn't it?
It demands intellectual impartiality. You have to be just as ready, just as eager to look for evidence that indicates your theory needs to be altered or abandoned as you are to look for evidence that confirms it.
If you're already committed to a certain outcome.
Then you're not genuinely inquiring. You're just looking for justification.
Okay. And what about traditional logical methods like deduction, mathematics, classification? Are they just thrown out now?
Oh, not at all. Things like mathematical deduction or the systematic classification of concepts, these aren't seen as ends in themselves, perhaps. but they are recognized as incredibly powerful ways to perfect our methods and our intellectual tools, the ideas and concepts we use to organize experience and direct our actions more effectively. They become pragmatic tools for increasing the efficiency, the clarity, and the predictive power of our thinking and our plans.
So the big takeaway about logic, it's not about uncovering abstract fixed rules of thought that exist somewhere independently.
Right.
It's about actively developing and refining effective methods for intelligent action and problem solving in a world that is inherently uncertain and changing.
It's the study of how to think well, not just for its own sake, but so we can live and act well, more intelligently, more effectively.
Okay. So if our whole understanding of logic and truth shifts from finding fixed realities to developing effective tools for action and growth, how does that ripple outwards? How does it impact something as personal and vital as our sense of right and wrong, our morals?
Ah, yeah, the implications for morals are huge.
Our sources suggest traditional morals were often stuck, weren't they, on abstract rules and very general goals.
They often were. The traditional focus was frequently on defining a single, ultimate, highest good. The summum bonum.
Happiness, virtue, pleasing God.
Right, all those candidates. Or, alternatively, on establishing universal, unchanging moral laws that apply to everyone, everywhere, always.
But the new view challenges that.
The key difference, the sources argue, is recognizing that every single moral situation you actually face in life is in some way unique. The specific, individualized case with all its complexities and nuances is what truly matters most.
So you can't just apply a general rule like a rubber stamp.
Not blindly, no. General ends things like health, wealth, justice, honesty. These are still incredibly important,
Right.
but they aren't seen as fixed goals you just aim for, independent of the context.
What are they then?
They function more like useful intellectual tools. They're like classifications or suggestions that help you guide your inquiry in a specific situation. They help you diagnose what might be wrong, or suggest potential avenues for action in that particular case.
So justice helps you analyze a situation, but doesn't give you the exact answer beforehand.
Exactly. It helps you look for certain kinds of problems or imbalances. And this approach avoids a really big problem with the old way.
Which was?
Trying to define that single highest good or rank fixed goods in a permanent hierarchy leads to endless, often irresolvable arguments. How do you weigh justice against mercy in this case? Or personal happiness against duty?
Right.
It often results in either very rigid rule following that feels intuitively wrong in certain complex cases, casuistry essentially, or it just boils down to arbitrary personal preference.
In the example you used, saying health is good is true in general, but it doesn't tell me specifically what I should do about my unique health challenge right now, given my life, my circumstances.
Precisely. You don't seek health in general as an abstraction. You seek specific improvements in your health tied to your specific life and activities. The sources mention that cautionary figure, the valetudinarian.
The person obsessed with health.
Yeah, the person who makes health itself a separate abstract end. They become so obsessed with the idea of health that they actually miss out on living a full life. That shows the danger of treating these general ends as fixed goals instead of as flexible tools to guide action in specific situations.
Okay, so morals aren't about following a pre-written rule book or having a map to a single fixed destination called the good.
No, it's much more about developing effective methods. Methods of inquiry to accurately diagnose what's problematic or needed in a particular situation, and effective methods of contrivance, meaning intelligent planning and action to try and solve it or make it better.
This makes moral life sound inherently experimental.
It is. Your plans, your principles, the values you try to act on, they function as work your hypotheses.
Tested by.
Tested by their actual consequences in action. Do they lead to a better, more integrated, more satisfactory situation? And mistakes. Mistakes aren't primarily seen as sins demanding retribution.
What are they then?
They are lessons, opportunities to learn how to use your intelligence more effectively next time. This keeps morals flexible, vital, capable of adapting and growing as individuals and societies learn and change.
And what about that old philosophical distinction between things that are good in themselves, intrinsically good, versus things that are only good as means to something else, instrumentally good?
Ah, yes. That division, the sources argue, is actually quite harmful in practice.
Why?
Because it tends to isolate the things we value ideally, like art, beauty, learning, maybe religious experiences, from the practical, often economic activities of everyday life.
It puts them in separate boxes.
Exactly. And the result is that the ideal things can seem a bit thin, maybe detached from real life, even elitist. While the instrumental or practical things like work, making money can feel merely material, maybe even base, lacking any higher significance.
Keeping the beautiful separate from the useful, the spiritual from the economic.
Right. But when you start to see that almost anything can be both a means and an end, depending on the specific situation and how it connects to other activities,
And then you can weave them together.
then you can start weaving them together into the fabric of daily life. Aesthetic value can be found in the process of skillful production. Economic activity can be pursued with an eye towards its contribution to broader human flourishing, giving it ideal significance. This helps bridge that old gap between, say, naturalism and humanism, and it makes intellectual pursuits inherently moral because intelligence becomes the key tool for living a good, integrated life.
Okay, so if there's no single fixed highest good to aim for, what is the ultimate aim in this new moral perspective? Is there one?
Yes, but it's not a static state you arrive at, like achieving perfection or possessing happiness as if it were a finished object you could hold.
What is it then?
The end is growth, continuous growth, the process itself, the process of perfecting, maturing, refining your capacities and your experience.
So the journey is the destination in a way.
In a very important way, yes. Happiness isn't found in just passively having things or reaching some final state of rest. It's found in the success of ongoing activities, in the process of meeting challenges, learning, and developing your powers in interaction with the world.
So the goal is the ongoing process of getting better, becoming more capable,
Yeah.
not just being perfect already.
Exactly. The sources even offer a critique of utilitarianism along these lines. While utilitarianism aimed commendably for social welfare,
Yeah, the greatest good for the greatest number.
it still tended to think of that goal as a fixed sum, like an aggregate amount of pleasure that was to be acquired and possessed.
Okay.
And this focus on acquisition and possession, rather than on the creative process of growth and development, unintentionally ended up supporting the kind of economic materialism that prioritizes private gain and security of possession over fostering creative power or promoting social service.
Interesting critique. And education must be absolutely central to this idea of growth as the end.
Absolutely essential. Education, in this view, isn't just preparation for some future adult life, stuffing kids with facts they'll supposedly need later.
What is it?
It is the moral process itself. It's the continuous passage of experience from worse to better. It's the ongoing growth and reconstruction of experience for everyone throughout life.
So the ultimate moral test then of any institution, whether it's a school, a business, a government, is
Its contribution to the all-around growth of every single person involved or affected by it? Does it help people develop their capacities? Does it enrich their experience? Does it enable them to participate more intelligently and effectively in shared life?
That really shifts the focus, doesn't it? From just maintaining order or distributing resources
Right.
to actively cultivating the potential of the people within society.
It sees institutions as having this profound educative and therefore moral impact based on the kind of individuals they tend to foster or encourage.
Which brings us neatly to the final piece of this Reconstruction puzzle. How does all this change our ideas about society itself and the individual's place within it?
Right, the social dimension.
Our sources argue that traditional social philosophy, much like logic and morals, often got bogged down in abstract debates that weren't actually helping solve real-world problems.
They really did. You had these grand debates about the state versus the individual as if they were these two monolithic entities locked in combat. Or abstract discussions about the family as such, or property as such.
Which missed the point.
Which often miss the point of dealing with concrete problems in specific situations. What should happen with this form of private property in this particular economic context? What challenges this specific family facing right now? And how can social arrangements help?
It's like arguing about the abstract concept of health instead of diagnosing and treating a specific person's illness.
Exactly. And these abstract approaches, perhaps unsurprisingly, often ended up justifying the existing power structures.
How so?
Well, take organic theories that saw society as a single unified body. These could easily be used to justify the status quo, suppress dissent, and ignore very real conflicts of interest between different groups within society. Or the idea of a fixed, pre-existing individual somehow fully formed before society.
Yeah.
That led to thinking that social arrangements were just these external things, maybe necessary evils, whose main job was just to provide individuals with external security or maybe distribute pleasures and pains.
But the new view completely flips that idea of the individual, doesn't it?
It really does. Individuality, things we value, like initiative, resourcefulness, critical thinking, responsibility, these aren't seen as qualities you're just born with, inherent in some pre-social self.
Yeah, did they come from that?
They are created. They are developed through social interactions, through participation in shared activities, through the influence of customs, institutions, education. Social arrangements aren't just there to serve pre-made individuals. They are the very means of creating individuals, of shaping who people become.
Wow. So society doesn't just provide for individuals, it actively makes them, in a crucial sense.
Precisely. And this fundamentally changes how you judge institutions. You don't just ask if they're efficient or if they distribute goods fairly according to some abstract principle. You have to ask about their educative effect.
The impact on people.
Yes. What kind of people does this specific economic system tend to foster? What habits of mind does this political structure encourage? Does it train minds for obedience or for critical inquiry? Does it awaken curiosity, and if so, what kind? This completely removes that old artificial separation between, say, politics or economics on the one hand and morals or education on the other. They're intertwined.
You can't separate the justice of a society from the kind of people it produces and nurtures.
Exactly. And looking historically, the sources argue the real trend isn't towards more isolated, atomistic individuals.
What is it towards?
It's towards an explosion of diverse voluntary associations. People forming groups for all sorts of shared purposes, political parties, labor unions, corporations, scientific societies, clubs, online communities.
A multiplication of connections.
Right. Society isn't really one single monolithic organization or some super entity like the state, whose absolute sovereignty became kind of dogma, but is actually a relatively recent historical development.
It's more like a vast overlapping network of many different groups that people choose to belong to and participate in.
Society is many associations, and the fundamental process, the most important thing, is association itself.
Meaning?
People actually coming together, communicating, sharing experiences, ideas, values, working on common projects. That's the lifeblood. Organization, the formal structures, the rules, the institutions is really a subordinate tool. Its proper job is simply to facilitate and enrich that vital process of association, of shared life.
So the organization should serve the human connection, not the other way around.
Absolutely. Both the individual and the organization are ultimately means subordinate to the ongoing process of association. The individual becomes truly conscious, truly human, through communication and participation in shared life. An organization becomes rigid, deadening, and loses its purpose if it doesn't actively facilitate genuine human connection, communication, and shared experience.
This reconstructed vision, then, it paints a picture of a society where maybe making a living could be deeply connected with making a life worth living.
Yes.
Where science and emotion, practical action and imagination could actually work together rather than being seen as in conflict.
That's the hope. It's a call to use our collective intelligence to tackle our shared problems, to embrace change not as a threat but as an opportunity for growth, and to see our human capacity for creativity, freedom, and association not as something dangerous that needs to be tightly controlled, but as the most powerful force we have for building a better, more intelligent, and more humane society.
Wow, that really is. That's profound reconstruction. A deep dive indeed. We've traced this arc from a worldview grounded in fixed, unchanging ideas, a cosmos that looked static and hierarchical.
Right, focus on permanence and contemplation.
All the way to a view that sees the world and our place in it as fundamentally dynamic, experimental, and centered on growth and intelligent action within our actual ongoing experience.
It's a massive shift, a shift from seeking certainty and value in something fixed and outside of change, to finding value, direction, and even happiness in the continuous process itself, the process of reconstructing our ideas, our institutions, and ourselves based on experience and guided by intelligent inquiry.
And it means seeing our ideals not just as distant hopes or comforting places of escape, but as powerful, practical tools we can and must use right here, right now, to understand what's wrong, and to guide our options towards making things genuinely better. It really changes how we see everything.
Yeah.
Knowledge becomes operative and practical.
Morals become focused on growth in specific situations.
And society itself is seen as this dynamic web of associations that should ultimately be judged by how well they foster the growth of the individuals within them.
It really encourages us, doesn't it, to be active participants, intelligent agents in shaping our world, not just passive observers or inheritors of fixed traditions.
So here's a final thought to leave everyone with, building on that last point. If the only truly moral end is growth, and the ultimate measure of any institution is its contribution to the all-around growth of the individuals connected to it, what does that way of thinking tell you about the systems and institutions you interact with every single day? Your workplace, your school, your community, your government. Something to chew on.
Definitely something to think about.
We really hope this deep dive has given you some new perspectives, maybe some new tools for your own thinking.
Join us next time for another dive into the ideas that shape our world.